Welcome back. So, this wasn't the video I was intending on making this week. I've been working on a video about the Challenger 2 and how I believe it's the best tank for Ukraine. However, that video's been pushed back a week or so, so you'll have to deal with random background footage, which will probably be me playing DCS with relevant footage spliced in. Anyway, so Prigozhin is dead. Well, at the time of writing, which is about 7 hours after the plane went down till when this video releases, he is presumed dead. TASS is saying he's dead, so if you know anything about TASS, there's a 50-50 chance he's really gone. And as of the 27th of August, a Russian committee is saying he's confirmed dead, along with saying the genetic evidence matches with the 10 people said to have been on the flight. This could potentially have very serious ramifications, so let's get into it. First, some background about who Yevgeny Prigozhin is. Being born in Leningrad in 1961, it seems there's very little indication from an early age he would turn out like he did. His mother was a nurse and his father was a mining engineer, but unfortunately died when he was 9 years old. His grandfather was a soldier for the Red Army and received the For Courage Medal during the Battle of Rzhev, which was a series of battles actually during the Soviets' counteroffensive campaign against German Army Group Center, which resulted in anywhere between 1.1 and 2.3 million dead, wounded, sick, missing or captured soldiers for the Red Army, and 600,000 for the Germans. During his youth, he spent time with his great-uncle, a scientist in Ukraine where he worked at an open-pit uranium mine. Take that as you will. During his teen years, his stepfather introduced him to cross-country skiing, which would lead to an aspiration to go competitive. He graduated from the Leningrad Sports Boarding School No. 62 in 1977 at age 16, however his professional dreams were dashed when he suffered an injury of some kind. At 18, Prigozhin was sentenced for the first time. He was caught stealing and was given a suspended sentence of 2.5 years. After he returned from his sentence, which he served at a chemical plant, he joined a gang in Leningrad. As part of the gang, Prigozhin was involved in multiple crimes and involved in a reportedly quite large burglary spree. He was caught after he had choked a woman during a robbery and had made off with a number of her items with the aid of accomplices. He was arrested and charged with robbery, theft, fraud, prostitution, and involving minors in criminal activity. For this, he received 12 years in a high-security penal colony. From 1981 to sometime after 1985, roughly, he served in a high-security colony. On his own admission, he violated his terms of solitary confinement, but this is where I'm going to bring up something difficult when researching Prigozhin. In Russia, there is a law that makes it possible for a Russian citizen to apply to have untrue or irrelevant information about them removed from the internet, which has made it difficult to find specifics. So I cannot find why he was in solitary to begin with, but this extends to even the mundane as things like his sports injury as a teen. I have been unable to find any information relating to the nature of said injury. I can't even find the date of transfer for penal colonies. Prigozhin claims he undertook a number of jobs in prison alongside reading intensely. In 1988, the Soviet Union reduced his sentence to 10 years on good behaviour, and this is likely when he was moved to a medium security colony to live out the final 2 years of his sentence. After being released from prison, Prigozhin returned to Leningrad and began selling hot dogs at markets with his mother and stepfather. He claims at times he was making everything in his apartment before he would then sell the dogs at the market. However, during this time he also attended the Leningrad Chemical and Pharmaceutical College, but he never finished his degree in pharmacy. In 1991, Prigozhin began engaging in the supermarket and grocery business, eventually becoming a 15% stakeholder and manager at Contrast, the first grocery store chain in the now St. Petersburg, by 1997, which was also conveniently founded by a former classmate of his. From there, he kept being involved with foodstuffs, but also branched out. Around the mid-90s, Prigozhin was hired by his former classmate again, along with another business partner, to become the chief executive of Spectrum CGSC, which founded casinos all around St. Petersburg. It is speculated that this is around the time Prigozhin first came into contact with Vladimir Putin, as Putin was chairman of the supervisory board for casinos and gambling at the time. From here, Prigozhin continues his seemingly dominant and unobstructed rise to the restaurant scene of St. Petersburg, opening numerous bars and restaurants. In 1995, he opened the Vinny Club Bar and the Old Customs House restaurant. By 1998, his firm Concord Management and Consulting included 10 restaurants, 20 fast food companies, production and construction partners, and was involved in multiple restaurant and other commercial construction projects. At one of his restaurants, he hosted a number of dignitaries. These are a few, but not limited to, Putin, George Bush, Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, Prince Charles, Xi Jinping, and Angela Merkel. The full list will now scroll on screen for those interested. Considering he personally hosted and served these foreign heads of state and other influential parties, I can only imagine this would have brought him a certain amount of favour with each of them. It seems Prigozhin, or at least his culinary company's activities, continued through at least 2019. In this time, they received contracts for making meals for the Russian army, provided and became Russia's largest catering company, and provided multiple banquets and inauguration dinners to the Kremlin. Oh, and before I forget, made school meals which allegedly caused an outbreak of dysentery at one school in Moscow. Allegedly. He did also claim to meddle with both the 2016 and 2020 US election too, so, you know. And now the part more people are familiar with. Wagner PMC, or Private Military Company. Formed in 2014, they rose to prominence during the war in the Donbass region and the annexation of Crimea. It is speculated by some, and by myself, that Wagner was acting as a Russian proxy and that the Russian equipment that was being given to the pro-Russian rebels was actually from Wagner. By the end of 2014, they would only have 250 members, but this would swell to 50,000 by the end of 2022. Wagner acts as Russia's unofficial force projection, having dealings in Syria and Africa. In Africa, Wagner worked with many countries' governments with remote relations with Russia. In return, Wagner, and by extension Russia, received access to strategic locations such as outposts, airports and ports, but more importantly gained access to viable materials such as diamond, gold and uranium. The countries Wagner has been explicitly linked to in Africa are Sudan, the Central African Republic, Libya, Mali, Mozambique and Madagascar. By offering security along with the other benefits of being close to Russia, many of these African nations eventually become reliant on Russia, expanding their sphere of influence. However, arguably where Wagner entered the public eye for the first time was their operations in Syria, and more also when they didn't fare too well against the US Air Force, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. Wagner operations in Syria began in late 2015 when they were employed by the Russian government and sent to Syria as part of Russia's military intervention in support of the Assad regime. Despite their presence being officially denied, it was alleged that in the depths of Russian intelligence services it was being unofficially acknowledged and confirmed, with them reporting directly to the foreign intelligence arm of Russia's armed forces, the GRU. For the most part, Wagner operations alongside the Syrian government concentrated on taking ISIL combatants, notably helping secure Palmyra. Throughout 2015 to 17, Wagner continued to operate against ISIL. They acted as trainers, forward air controllers, reconnaissance, and often formed the spearhead of attacks. However, it is in the early part of 2018 that they would gain infamy around the world. In early 2018, the US had just announced it would ramp up its support of the Syrian Democratic Forces, known from here on as the Kurdish. As part of this support, the US no longer targeted exclusively ISIL and pro-Assad forces, but would target Syrian government forces themselves. This came to a head at Qashm. Allegedly, on the night of the 7th of February, Wagner and pro-Syrian fighters attacked a Kurdish headquarters just outside the town. They opened up with artillery and rockets launched at the HQ, while Syrian forces pressed the attack with the support of tanks. According to the US government, there were US Special Forces personnel in the compound at the time of the attack, which gave them adequate cause to utilize their aerial assets in the area. Both Wagner and the US Department of Defense state that the US was in constant contact with their Russian liaison, and only began the airstrikes once it was confirmed no regular Russian personnel was present. However, this being the US military, they threw everything, including quite possibly a kitchen sink, at the attacking forces. The aircraft listed as being involved are multiple AC-130 Spectre gunships, an F-22 Raptor, multiple F-15E Strike Eagles, a Reaper UAV, multiple Apache attack helicopters, and multiple B-52 bombers, on top of an artillery barrage and guided missile strike by HIMARS. All said and done, between 50 and 200 pro-Syrian forces were killed, with one Kurdish fighter being wounded. It was this 4-hour-long battle that arguably brought Wagner to become more known outside of military enthusiasts. Prior to the current war in Ukraine, members of Wagner, and allegedly Prigozhin himself, had flown back from Africa to assassinate Ukrainian President Zelensky. Within a week, Zelensky had survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 of which allegedly perpetrated by Wagner. Although not initially being deployed at the start of the invasion, they did train Russian soldiers along with prison convicts who had chosen to serve 6 months with Wagner in return for amnesty. It is likely Prigozhin used his own time in prison to help convince the inmates. It was reported that as of the start of 2023, 80% of Wagner was made up of recruited convicts, and they were sent forward on wave attacks designed to soften Ukrainian defences for the actual Wagner mercenaries. Wagner throughout the conflict appeared to be better trained and better equipped than even the regulars of the Russian army. In fact, to capture the city Bakhmut, it was Wagner, not the Russian army, that did the majority of the fighting and seizing of territory and eventually the city. However, on the 25th of May, following the announced capture of Bakhmut, Wagner had begun withdrawing its forces from the area, likely after sustaining heavy casualties. It seems that it's here that any semblance of cooperation between the Russian military and Wagner breaks. Prigozhin claims that the Russian army mined the withdrawal route used by Wagner, and he was very critical of Russian performance in and around Bakhmut. Furthermore, it was claimed that units from the Russian army had actually been ordered to open fire on the retreating Wagner. All this, along with the corruption and incompetence of the Russian military's highest generals, led to the Wagner Rebellion on June 23rd. Because the rebellion was so widely reported and known about, I'll only touch on it briefly. Wagner effectively declared war on Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu and went on a manhunt for him. It should be stated that Wagner's public goal was to remove corruption and incompetence from the Russian military and see that Shoigu was punished. In the short 2-day rebellion, they encountered next to no military resistance from the Russian military and actually shot down 6 helicopters and a plane. Wagner took the military base they had pegged as their objective, but ultimately didn't get Shoigu, as they were stood down and left peacefully following talks with Putin and Belarus President Lukashenko. The Russian public clapped and cheered them away. Thanks to that brief overview, it is time to get down to the consequences of the situation with Prigozhin allegedly being killed, of which I see 2 possibilities, one significantly less likely than the other, especially with more information being released. Option 1. Wagner stands down and either sits still or is assimilated into the Russian military. This, in my opinion, is the least likely option. Although the likely new leader of Wagner, Konstantin Pikolov, is pro-Kremlin, during the rebellion fighters were offered amnesty and Russian military contacts if they surrendered. To my knowledge and research, none took the Kremlin up on their offer. As such, it's likely Wagner would not be thrilled or even willing to accept any Russian terms, which leads me onto the second option. Option 2. Wagner goes for revenge. This is the most likely option, and based on some of the videos being released on Telegram reportedly of Wagner fighters, the one that is actively being prepared for. With videos releasing of fighters reportedly saying, "Wait for us," or "We're coming," it looks like they're getting ready to go on the warpath. Now initially, and for the couple days after the crash, I thought it was 50-50 who Wagner went for between Russia and Ukraine. If it was Ukraine, then Wagner opening up a second front from Belarus, with a significant amount of Ukrainian forces are engaged in the east, could have catastrophic consequences. However, Putin opened his mouth and, short of outright admitting it, said possibly the worst thing he could have ever said. Putin claimed in an interview a few days after the crash that Prigozhin had made serious mistakes. Well, if that's not an implication of guilt, then I don't know what is. And apparently Wagner think the same, as nearly every indication suggests a second foray into Russia. It's difficult to tell the exact impact a second Wagner rebellion could have without knowing where they target. I will say it's likely they will have similar success as the first rebellion, as despite being forced to hand in tons of equipment after the first revolt, based on videos of Wagner in Africa from a week ago as a recording, it seems they didn't struggle replacing that lost equipment. It is likely they'd face little to no military resistance with the exception of reserve and guard units for key figures and places, and with Prigozhin gone, the ability to reason using people such as Lukashenko has also been removed, so how they'd stop Wagner once they got going is anyone's guess. These men were loyal to Prigozhin, and it seems they are out for blood. On top of that, a second Wagner rebellion could easily weaken Putin's supposed control over Russia itself. Well, like I said at the beginning, I was not expecting to make this video, but I hope you enjoyed that brief foray into Wagner and what on earth is going to happen now. It's likely going to be an interesting few weeks as the situation destabilizes until something gives way. I do believe it's more likely than not Wagner will rebel against Putin, but only time will really tell what they decide and if they force me to make another video on them. Until then, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.